What's going on, everybody? It's Brian Trippe. I am here in Birmingham, Alabama. Welcome to the REI Live podcast, Real Estate Investing Live. We interview the very best real estate investors, entrepreneurs, business leaders all throughout this great country. And today is no different. We have Adam, Triple A Adams. How's it going today, Adam?
It's going fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to have you on the show. I think a lot of people know who you are. You have a very visible persona out there in social media. I think a lot of people know who you are, but may not know you super well. Maybe not, at least on our show. So I would love for you to kind of start off, just tell everybody who you are and what you do in real estate.
Absolutely. Brian, thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to be invited to the show. I know you have some really heavy hitters, and to be on the show is an honor. So a little bit about me. I've been real estate investing for about 12, 13 years. And I started doing multifamily in 2007 and 2008. And I suffered a crash. It wasn't that bad, but I did suffer a crash. And then recently we started doing something a little bit different. It's called syndication. It's buying large multifamily, but we do it not with our own money. We do it actually more like a company that goes public. So we will actually raise the equity from other people to buy larger apartment buildings. We've been doing that for about a year and a half, and it's going pretty well. And we've had a lot of successes. We've bought a few hundred doors in the last year and a half, and we hope to keep growing.
That's awesome. So you've been in real estate for 12, 13 years, and you got started multifamily in 2007-08. So maybe kind of right away in the first couple of years, you made a decision, it sounds like, to focus on multifamily. What went into that decision? Why multifamily?
Well, my dad's always been in multifamily and doing self-storage units, and he always talked to me about doing the same thing. What really got me into multifamily is because I was rejecting all the way. I was rejecting the idea of being involved in real estate in any way, shape, or fashion, at least until I got old and boring like my dad. And then I said, well, maybe when I'm old and boring, that's when I'll do it, but I'm not going to do it now. What you're saying makes sense. Save 10%, put 10% off to investing, tithe 10%. Pay yourself first, 10%. And I was like, if I do that many 10%, so I'll have nothing left over to do anything fun with. So I'm not going to do that. And one year in 2005, he purchased a property for $100 and he gifted it to me. And then I got that for Christmas of 05. And the same day that he gave me this property, he told me that I had to pay him $100 for it. And I was just like, I don't understand. You paid $100. Why would I pay the same thing? I thought this was supposed to be a Christmas present. But I told him, fine, you've been trying to get me into real estate for a long time, so I'll do it. All right. So when I sold that property less than 2 years, about 2 years later, I made $12,000, and it made me think to myself, I spent $100 and I made $12,000. Maybe there is something to real estate. So this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, which he had been trying to make me read from the day that it came out, I finally just said, I'll read it. So to answer your question, what got me into multifamily is when I read that book, I learned a lot about Robert Kiyosaki, that he actually made all of his wealth in multifamily investing. It was not single family. I never knew that. He teaches all things real estate, but he does multifamily. So I just said to myself, well, that's what I'm going to have to do. If I want to be like Robert Kiyosaki, I need to do multifamily. That was the decision. And the first step to it was to become a property manager. So I learned how to manage the property. And so that was 2007. We repositioned. It's called reposition. Your audience knows fix and flips very, very well with single family. So they know what it means to add a little bit of value to a property and then to sell it for more and for a large profit. So the owner of the property, I was the manager, bought it for $1,050,000, and then we sold it for $2 million a year later. And not because we put in work like $500,000. We didn't do that. All we did is lowered expenses, raised rents, And all of a sudden, the property based on a what's called a capitalization rate, the property based on its income was worth twice as much as when he purchased it. So he made about $1 million. And I just said to myself, great, now I know how to do this. And so I bought my first one in 2008.
That's fascinating. So your first step was to go and be a property manager.
Yes.
Why? How? Like, how did you know to to do that? Excuse me. Why did you do that? That sounds like a terrible first step.
It is a good and a bad first step. And the why is because I saw my dad. In my mind, everything that your dad does is dumb. A lot of kids are that way. They reject anything that their parents are doing. And I saw that my dad owned all of these properties and he paid professional property management and he literally did everything completely passively. He didn't even work like an hour a month on his rentals. He just looked at the paperwork for a few minutes and he goes, okay, we're doing good, or okay, I need to make a call. And I looked at that in the wrong way. I looked at that in a way of my dad is wasting 10% of his income by giving it to a property management company for his storage units, for his, and I looked at that and I was like, you've got a lot of rentals. So you're literally like wasting $5,000 a month. Like that's a lot of money. I would never do that. And so I said to myself, I have to know how to manage the property because I'm not going to be dumb like my dad, who went completely passive for his income. I'm going to make every dime that I can make. I'm a hustler. Of course, I'm going to manage my own properties. So that's really why I decided to do that, because I thought the best way to kind of hack the system and to learn how to manage properties was to do it with somebody else's property.
So would you recommend someone who's newer, would you recommend that they take a similar route as you did?
I would say that there's two routes that could be good, and that is a good route. It is a route that's good. It might scare you off completely. It may turn you off from owning rentals if you see how hard it is to be the manager, because there's always things, especially with like many units. I mean, you own a ton of units, and if I was thinking I had to manage my own 50 or 60 or 18 units, I think it would be a little bit stressful, and you can really learn that with somebody else's money. So that's a good way, but man, what would I say is the best way? I would say the best way is probably to buy the property and just hire another person to manage it. I would say that's probably the best way to learn it, is to hire somebody else to do all the work and you just own the asset passively. But my way was good too.
So you learned a lot. You learned a ton. You learned the inner workings of the business. So how did you buy your first property? It sounds like to me you went and you learned a lot. The guy sold the property. You were kind of left there without a job, really, it sounds like. How did you said the next thing you did was go buy something. How did you do that?
So I was, at the time I had a handyman company and I had 13 employees. So um, it was all labor. So I was making pretty decent money, like three-ish $1,000 a day. So whatever that, it's a lot. It's over $250,000 a year. But I remember I had good income, but my company wasn't very solidified. It hadn't been out for a long time. So in the end of 2008, the banks got smarter than they had been in the past, and they stopped doing the stated loans, and they started saying that you need 2 full years of tax history. But I didn't have 2 full years of tax. I didn't even have one. I think I think I was about a year-ish in owning that company. And I don't think I had ever filed a tax return, but I could show them like all the income that was coming in. And because I went from bank to bank to bank, and I probably talked to at least a dozen banks, and they all kept saying, no, we can't finance you. And I was like, well, who else can? Because like I make good money. My credit score was almost 800 at the time. And it's like, why would you not give me a loan. Everything here makes total sense. And what ended up happening for me is because all the banks were saying no, I asked a regular human if they could buy this whole property cash and then make a mortgage out to me, and they said yes. So that's what I did. I had somebody purchase the property, and then they created a mortgage note for in my name, and I just paid them instead of they became the bank.
It sounds to me like, and I have to apologize, I'm a little under the weather, so I apologize for my voice, but it sounds to me like, Adam, like your dad, it sounds to me like he played like a pretty big role in your real estate career. Yeah, I don't know you very well, but it almost seemed like you were downplaying it a little bit. Now, the more you kind of get into your story, I feel like your dad played a big role in that. Am I wrong? Like, talk about the impact that your family had in you just getting into real estate and being successful.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think I do downplay it a little bit because I want to be my own man. But to be honest with you, just kind of growing up, always having rentals, often, being at the rental to watch the turnover. When I had my handyman company, my dad hired my company to do some work at some of these. And so just like with him having so many units growing up, it almost became second nature for me, I suppose, where I didn't have the same type of learning curve that somebody would have if they didn't have a relative that close to them that was, showing them the business every day. I did reject it for a long time, and very grateful that I ended up going toward it. Now I just do real estate full time. Everything I do, it revolves around buying more property and, trying to get that more larger passive income. And my dad was very, very instrumental in that.
And where did you grow up? I'm sorry.
Oh, Utah. I grew
Okay.
up in Utah, Davis
Gotcha.
County.
And all the real estate your dad owned was local.
Everything that he owned was in Utah. It wasn't all local. So a lot of the raw land that he purchased was in random smaller counties throughout the state. So he did a tax deed auction uh, every October. They're on different weekends, but you can only really go to 4 because it's on, I think it's like a Wednesday, a Wednesday, a Wednesday, a Wednesday in October. And all of the municipalities have the tax deed sales in that same month, and I think it's all on a Saturday or whatever it is. So you could only do 4, even though there's like hundreds of counties. You could only do 4, and he used to purchase a lot of property, or he probably still does that every year. But most of his rentals and multifamily and self storage are within about a 45-minute drive of his house.
The story you told earlier about him giving you the house and then making you pay $100 for it, it's a really interesting story. And surely you've talked to him about that since. What was, from his perspective, what was that about? And then from your perspective, how did you kind of receive that?
Great. Okay, from his perspective first, I I was a child who wanted to do everything completely different, and I'm still the same way. I always am the out of box thinker. My podcast is called the Creative Real Estate Podcast because I don't want to do anything like everybody else does. I want to do it a little bit differently. And so I obviously, as I've said a few times, I kind of rejected everything that he tried to teach me, or at least I said, I'll do that when I'm old and boring, but not now. So I think from his perspective, seeing this kid who had potential, but just wouldn't do anything, he finally just decided to give me one of the pieces of land. So you said house, it was a cabin lot. It
Got
was
it.
about a acre of land in San Pete County, Aspen Hills Owner Association, and he just gifted it to me. And I kind of looked at him like, okay, I mean, I'm sure this is really good for me. I'm sure it's nice to have this, but I wasn't certain that I would do anything with it. And so from my perspective, I got this piece of land and I was just like, okay, well, that's great. I wasn't ready to move into real estate yet. And then when he told me I had to pay him $100 for it, I was just like, I was like, what kind of Christmas present is that? If you paid 100, you're just making me buy a piece of land. Like, the real thing is you're just making me buy it. You're the worst kind of wholesaler in the world because you haven't even made a profit. But like, that's not a gift. And his answer, and I have never looked into it, he said, because of taxes, I have to make you pay something for it. And 100 is as low as I could go, to make it good on the tax bill.
So he was
And
almost forcing you to get into real estate.
he did force me. Not almost. He did specifically force me into real estate. And so I held on to that property. I remember the tax bill came and it was an extra $100 or so to pay the next tax bill.
Right.
And I was just like, I'm a college kid, right? I'm not thinking about this at all. And like, I'm working as a server at the time. I was working as a server at a restaurant and paying tuition, paying books, paying not hotel. Hopefully I didn't have a hotel, paying, room and board for myself. And I was just like, all of a sudden this tax bill came up. I was like, Dad, why do they want me to pay $100? What is this? He goes, that's the taxes. And I was like, do I have to pay this? And he's like, yeah, you have to pay it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So I, saved up the 100 and made it just in time. And then the next year somebody offered me 12 grand for it. And I was just like, yes. But that's kind of ties us into what I was saying before.
Yeah.
I calculated the return of the 100 that I spent and then the taxes that I spent, and minus the commissions, I made like a 8,300 and something percent return on investment. And I was just like, no wonder my dad does this. So fine, I'll read that book that you've been telling me I should read since it came out. I'll read it. And I read it and kind of like decided that my path was going to be multifamily.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story. I don't know if it's hard or easy for you to kind of rehash that, but I think that it applies. And I think that there are some people who will listen to the show and get value out of that, whether it's a relationship that they have with their dad, or maybe it's a relationship that they have with their son. So I really do appreciate that. And I think about these things. My son's only 2, right? And I think about these things like, what am I going to force things on him? Am I going to make him, even though I know that it's right for him, am I going to make him do it? I just think that there's a lot of value in that story. That's why I asked you. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to move on. The main reason I want to have you on the show is I wanted to talk to you about syndication. We really haven't talked about that. Maybe just in passing, maybe we defined it. We've had some multifamily people on, Rod Cleef's been on the show that I know you have a relationship with. Some other people that have done multifamily have been on the show as well. But we've never really kind of dove really deep into what it is, how you can do it. I'm a big action step kind of person. So let's just start the very, very beginning. What is syndication? And how could someone actually get into doing something like that?
Perfect. There's syndication, really just the word itself just basically means that you're using a lot of different avenues with very little effort. Okay, in general. So if you are syndicating an ad, then you find a way to make the ad automatically appear in many, many, many spaces. So as far as real estate goes, this is where we find the larger properties have a lot more value. They have a ton of value and they're safer. Even in a downturn, they're more safe than the smaller assets. So we're trying to decide how can we buy that bigger asset to be safer. but we don't have like 10 million, 20 million, $30 million sitting in our bank account today. So most people would look and say, well, theoretically, they say that back in the biggest recent downturn, where there was tons of houses going to foreclosure, these larger buildings had less than a 1% default rate, let alone foreclosure rate. I mean, they weren't even behind on their mortgage. And it's like asking yourself, okay, so how can I do that? And when you sit there and you say, well, okay, well, it needs like 5 million just to put us a down payment, even if I was going to use a bank, that's not going to work because I don't have 5 million. This is a way to say, let's partner with a lot of people. Let's find the safest asset. Let's find the best asset class that is here in the world, the one that did the best through the last downturn. And instead of purchasing that property and needing us to come up with all the money, what can we do to find a way to add value to a lot of different people? So maybe you'll raise $5 million, but you'll bring in 100 different investors, passive investors that all put 50,000, or maybe you'll bring 50 investors that all do 100,000. And all of a sudden now they're making double-digit returns on their money, and we become the person who runs the property. And that way we can buy the safer type of asset, the best performing asset class on the planet, and offer great opportunities for other people as well. So that's really what it means to syndicate a property. You buy one property with passive investors, people that are the real kind of passive.
Why would someone like yourself want to do that? You said you've been doing this for about a year and a half. Why would someone like yourself want to do this?
So we want to syndicate because we want to be in helping other people to place their money in a better place than the stock market could be completely volatile. I have a huge opinion on what's going to happen with the stock market soon. And I don't want to see people that have been putting their money to the stock market over and over, or trying to buy a rental and then something bad happens with. I believe that the likeliness, if you just have one rental, if all you have is one rental, which might cost you $100,000 anyways, right? The probabilities of you losing money are very, very, very high. You don't start getting your own economies of scale until you hit like 20 rentals yourself. So this is a way to help protect other people's money so they can make good returns, and completely passively. They don't even have to be the property manager. They're very, very passive. So it's, I guess, out of the 12, 13 years of investing, seeing my dad do what he does, this is a way for us to give back and also to make money at the same time.
So, Adam, you're ruffling a lot of feathers of some people who are my audience when you're sitting here talking about single family residence in such a way. I want you to get a little bit deeper into what you just said. You said the economies of scale don't even really start to take off until you reach 20 rentals. What makes you say that?
Okay. Well, I own 23 small rentals, and each and every one of them on their almost every single one of them on their own loses money, because even if you have like a $400 cash flow, when you have to do a roof, or when you have to do a water heater, or when you have to, I just have on one of my fourplexes, 2 tenants moved out recently, and the bill to just rehab it is $8,000 per unit, which is a lot more than the cash flow in the first place. So if somebody bought like one fourplex and they were planning to make cash flows, and they said, I'm making 500, you just never really know like who's going to move out, when they're going to move out. When you get to these larger assets, the way that you look at them is completely different. The way that they're valued is on a 2-year of income and expense. So you look at their expenses for the last 24 months, look at their income over the last 24 months, and it's just much, much safer to get into a property and understand where your cash flow number is going to be. When with your into 10 rentals, Like I have 23 small rentals. If you just have 10 of them, it's a lot harder to know who's going to move and when if you're just going and buying random ones, because you don't look and you don't, well, maybe some people do this. They don't normally go to the owner of the property and say, over the last 2 years, when did you replace what? How long has this person been there? What's been your capital budget? It's just they value it completely differently on single family. And so in my own opinion, and from what I've experienced and from what I've seen and from what other people that get into multifamily say as well, it's much, much safer for your money to be in the larger asset.
If that's the case, why do you have 23?
I just haven't sold them yet. That's all. I just haven't yet sold them.
So are you saying that single family is you said it was a break-even business?
That's a good question. So I didn't specifically say that.
That's why I want to clarify.
I didn't specifically say that. I just said that when you buy a single family for a rental, let me use somebody as an example. Her name is Kim Lee, an Asian friend of mine that lives here in Colorado, and she sent me a message and said, "Hey, I'm excited. I'm going to buy another single family rental, and the mortgage costs me $2,000 a month, and the rent is $2,100, so I'm making $100." And I almost ripped out my hair, like, to even think about that, because really what's going to happen is she's probably going to be spending about $700 or $800 a month to hold on to this asset. It's actually going to cost her money. And that's not the case everywhere. I understand Birmingham has better cash flow numbers. I own a bunch of stuff in Ohio, Tennessee, and Missouri, and they have better cash flow numbers. But some of these properties that quote cash flow, when you look at all of the expenses that you will have to do, it's like you might make 100 or 400 a month for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden you have like one capital expense that takes away those last 3 years and the next 3 years of your income. And so it's really difficult to get ahead, is what I'm saying. It's very, very difficult to plan for things with smaller properties. When we buy our larger properties, they're usually cash flowing 500 or more per door. And then we take out we put tons of money aside for things that can happen like this. And the banks actually make you do that as well, which is why in the worst recent economic downturn, when there was tons of houses going to foreclosure, that we had a 0.8% default rate in large multifamily, because the way that the banks look at it is the income and the expenses for the last 2 years, and they will determine how much they can set aside. And their numbers are really this thing called a debt service coverage ratio, a Dscr. And that means like what amount of your money goes to the mortgage and how much more do you have left over. So if it's a 1.2% DSCR, that means you have 20% more sitting in the bank than the mortgage cost you. And that's really where they start to underwrite or look at the numbers. And for our company, we try to be even more conservative than that. So we want 60% more net cash passive income than the mortgage will cost us. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that we will never have a foreclosure or default or anything like that. So
good answer. Again, people that listen to this show are more of the single family. That's why we haven't had a ton of multifamily type of people on, but it's great to have perspective on a lot of different asset classes. And, this is the asset class that you said is the best. So I want to continue to talk about that, and specifically syndication. If I were to start syndicating, like let's just say I've got relationships personally with a lot of people who have a lot of money and they want to park their money somewhere. For someone like me, or for someone who is well connected like that, or someone who has money like that, what's kind of the step by step? I know you can't get into all the granular details, but what's step one? Like, what's the first thing or second thing I should be doing if I wanted to try to syndicate multifamily real estate?
Okay, I'll use you as the example. So you have connections. You can raise equity quickly because of your connections, and you want to switch your focus from single family to multifamily syndication. What is the best way? And the answers that I have is number one, education. You probably need to pay somebody who will coach and mentor you in the syndication space. And I'm not pitching myself as that coach and mentor. There's many of them all around the country. But you need to at least learn the differences, how the properties are valued and how to cut your expenses if you're trying to, quote, run the show. If you want to run the show and have your own, this is probably the first place that you want to go to really understand how it works, and take like a year-long mentorship and then start to analyze deals and put in offers all day, every day. It's pretty much a full-time business if you're running the show. I have 6 people on my team and we're all full-time. So I'd be surprised if any one person could do this alone, like just on the side. You know, you'd have to make a decision to really quit what you're doing and focus on it 100%.
That's a good point.
And then when you do that, then when you're going to start to find deals, here's the issue that you'll run into in the beginning is that the real brokers out there don't want to give you the deal. They don't want you to have the deal because you don't yet have like 2,000 doors. So the credibility is a difficult thing. You're swimming upstream. So really what you want to do is first educate yourself. And the second thing is to align yourself. So you basically partner with other people that are already in the space, because it's that catch-20, what comes first. It's like, how can I buy my first one if I don't already own them? And how can I own them if I don't, haven't already bought one? So what do I do? And the answer is that you align yourself with somebody who's doing it. So whatever coaching mentor that you have, you said you had Rod Cleef on the show. He's a mentor. He's owned 2,000 homes and apartments over the years. And so he'd be a great person to align with. So you basically want to find out everything that sponsor, that person that's done it before. The sponsor really means the person signing on the loan. So you'll need somebody on your team that has signed on a loan. And if you aligned yourself with Rod Cleef then and his other team and those members, then you would be able to qualify for loans easier. You'd be able to get the deals coming from the brokers easier. And you'd also be able to raise equity easier, because if it's your very first one, not very many people that are investing their money want somebody to try for the first time with their money. So you'll want to align with somebody who's been doing it. That's very, very important. Now, if we look at the other part of the question that you asked, and you said, if I just have money, how do I get involved? And so if you want to run the show and you have money, it's the same answer. It's a difficult business to be in. If you just want to be passive, then you want to just meet a couple of operators, that somebody like me, someone like Rod Cleef, and you want to understand where they invest, how they give returns, and how conservative they are. And once you have that understanding of the people that you want to place your money with passively, then you'll just wait for the deal and then maybe pull out $100,000 at a time and be involved in a few different deals. Yeah. So that's probably the best way. And then there's something that you didn't ask, but I'll say that there's other ways to get involved. Number one is you can just be a money raiser, only raising money and being involved in a deal. And so if you have that team and you don't want to be the person running the show, the skipper, then what you can do is you can just align yourself with a team and that has a track record, and then you can just partner with them and just keep bringing the money to the same deals. And the last way that you could is if you had a way to find a deal, which that's the hardest part. The finding deals part is the toughest part. But if you found one, teams like mine would be grateful to have a deal that made sense, especially in this market. They're not as easy to find. So we could automatically write you in on a property and you would have to do almost nothing else. Just find the deal or just raise money. But if you want to run the show, there's a lot of education involved and aligning yourself. And if you just want to make money this way and make, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20% returns, then you just partner with a team that has been doing that.
That's awesome. That's a lot of great information. I appreciate that, Adam. And when you said write you in, like if you want to just get involved, write you in, what does that mean exactly?
What that means is that the company that actually purchases the property is not in human beings' names. It's in a new LLC. So what I mean by that is that your name would be one of the owners of the LLC that owned the asset. Yep, you would own equity. Exactly.
Wow. Just by finding a deal or finding some money.
Yes.
Just by getting involved. That's really interesting. I really do appreciate that. I think that could be useful for a lot of people who are listening to the show, because we have a lot of wholesalers, and I know that wholesaling is big even in the multifamily space. So, you find a great deal in the multifamily space and you get in touch with a guy like Adam, who they're looking for deals. He said it's the hardest part of the business. Probably the hardest part about real estate total right now is trying to find a great deal. So appreciate that great information. Adam, you already called me out once. There's something I forgot. Is there anything else specific to syndication that I just am not knowledgeable enough to even ask?
I don't think so. I think we covered the basics. As far as like really syndicating, there's a lot to learn about it. So maybe we could just mention some of the roles. One of the roles, so the reason I have 6 people in my team, I'll just go over what they do, and that might answer that question for you a little bit better. So me specifically, in our syndication company, my main role is to speak at other people's RIAs, to do podcast interviews, both on theirs and on ours. We have a podcast as well. We host events, so my role is to host those events, to plan those events, to bring in the speakers from around the country that are some of the best. Very similar to with your RIA, where you want the best speakers from around the country to be at your RIA. Those things help place a company on the map to be able to raise equity easier, to be able to find deals easier. So that's a role in a syndication company that can be very important. Running your own meetup group, running your own podcast, hosting large events, or going and speaking at other people's events. Another role in our company is a social media person. So a lot of people, and I think you said this at the beginning of the episode, is that you see me on social media a lot, and that maybe some of your audience has heard my name, but they might not know everything about me. Well, the reason why I'm very active, I'm doing air quotes for those just listening, the reason I'm very active on social media is because there's one person in our company that's main role is to post things in my name and to follow up, because it's very important that people know what you're doing. If you're going to be raising equity, you have to, a lot of people have to know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So there's somebody in the office who's a social media expert, and he does that for me. And then we have an admin, because there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of filing things, there's a lot of making sure that the books are made, because when you're having a role where your other people's money is really at stake, it needs to be very necessary and important for you to really feel like you're doing everything you can as a fiduciary for your investors. And so there's one person who only has a job of making sure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And then we have a market research team, which is very, very, very important. If you're going to get involved into any type of real estate, you want to understand the market that you're in. Where is it within its cycle? Where is that market within its cycle? Is it going up? Is it coming down? Is everybody talking about it because it's at its peak? And if you go into it next year, it's going to be half price. And so you're putting your investors in a bad position. So there's that market research team. And then you have to have an underwriter who, our underwriter's an engineer. And for that one person, they look at deals every day. They look at the numbers every day. They do forecasting projections, and they work very closely with like the market research team to make sure that if a deal comes across our desk that's in a new market that we haven't researched, that we want to make sure that the comparables are real, because there's something called a pro forma that the brokers are going to give you. That's a pro forma, meaning that they're trying to tell you what this property can do in the next 5 years. And you want to basically look at those numbers and try to prove them wrong every time you see them. You want to try to prove the pro forma as a lie as best you can to understand it. And if you can't prove it wrong, then you got to buy the deal, right? So it's very important to understand what factors really are there. And that's why I said earlier why you would want to get educated if you were going to run the show. And then the most important person on our team, absolute number one most important person on the team, is the asset manager. So there's one person that literally makes sure that the asset is performing. And so he just flew out of town for a couple of days to one of our properties. He's going to another one of our properties next month. And this is extremely important because a lot of people that are syndicators, they believe that the big part of syndication is closing the deal. Because what we've talked about so far in this podcast is how hard it is to raise money, how hard it is to get your name out there, how hard it is to find the deal, to prove to the brokers that they can give you a deal. But what a lot of new syndicators forget is that once you close, the deal's not over. It's not like you won already. It's the most important part is to make sure that it gets managed appropriately and correctly, and that you're reducing your expenses and raising your rents. So we have one person on the team that only focuses on asset management. So I guess it's just important to share how many roles there are to make this business a real business, because we're not dabbling, we're not investing, right. We're actually performing a service.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I appreciate you explaining that. It was a really good explanation. So Adam, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
They can find me at realbluespruce.com.
Awesome. realbluespruce.com. We'll link it up in the show notes. Adam, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, providing value to our audience. Really do appreciate you. Guys, hit the subscribe button. You do not want to miss out on the incredible content, incredible guests that we have lined up for the rest of 2019. Very excited to get these guys to you. So hit that subscribe button, rate us, review us. We love you. We'll see you next time.